Today we're going to take a look at the Canadian stock market, which has not performed well so far this year. If we take a look at the Canadian TSX Composite Index, you can see here the negative performance since earlier in the year. In fact, so far this year the index is down. This relative line relative to the S&P 500, you can see it downward sloping, so the Canadian stock market's been underperforming really since late last year. And a lot of investors are now saying, well, it's Canada's turn to start outperforming. Not so fast on that, because just because something's underperformed doesn't mean that it's going to start to outperform. On a seasonal basis, and the tendency right now is to still favor the U.S. stock market. In my 2016 Thackeray's Investors Guide, I introduced a strategy called the Canadian Snowbird Trade, which basically says from October 28th until December the 18th, the U.S. stock market tends to outperform the Canadian stock market. And at the time, in 2014, up until 2014, you can see here for the last 8 years in a row that the Canadian stock market underperformed the U.S. stock market. And since that time period, if we go back here for a second, you can see in 2015, underperformance once again that time period. And even though the Canadian stock market, the TSX Composite, did really well in 2016, it underperformed from October 28th until December the 18th. So what drives this trade? Well, you know, from a seasonal basis, the sectors of the Canadian stock market aren't typically the major sectors of the stock market. A lot of them don't have their seasonal strong period at that time of the year. So for instance, the energy sector tends not to perform well, and also the gold miners as well. So overall, the tendency is still to favor the Canadian U.S. stock market at this time relative to the Canadian stock market. But there is an exception. If we go back and take a look at this cluster of times where the Canadian stock market did outperform the U.S. stock market, that was when there was a strong commodity rally taking place. People were talking about the super commodity cycle at that time. Now, if we see commodities have a large pickup here, well, maybe the Canadian stock market will outperform. But still, on a seasonal basis, everything else being equal, it's at least investors should consider still favoring the U.S. stock market in the short term up until mid-December. Thank you very much.